Jessica Malthy is a monster. The police have now found a fourth baby deceased in her home. This is what the home looks like after she was evicted and the landlord went inside to change the locks. New charges have been filed against a 39-year-old woman in Pennsylvania after yet another dead infant was found in the home she had been renting. The fourth deceased baby authorities recovered from inside the residence. Jessica Malthy, who was taken into custody last weekend, is now facing additional charges, including 1 count each of criminal homicide and involuntary manslaughter. Malthy earlier this week was charged with 1 count of criminal homicide and 1 count of abuse of a corpse after the owner of the property discovered the baby wrapped in a towel and stuffed in a garbage bag in a bedroom closet. The 3 additional children's bodies were found hidden in the attic. Brent Flanagan, the owner of the home in the 100 block of Oak Avenue in Cadogan Township, spoke to NBC, saying he evicted her from the property last month for not paying rent. After her dad passed away, the money stopped coming in. I don't know that she's ever physically paid me the rent. She would coax churches into paying the rent. He said that he and a coworker went to the home on September 13th after being informed that Malthy had left several cats behind, which is when they made the grisly discovery. We went in to start cleaning, and that's when we found the bag. It was wrapped up in 3 or 4 different garbage bags tied tight. The smell was horrendous. We opened it up, and there were towels in there. My worker and I, we peeled the towels back with a stick, and we could see there was just rotting, decomposing something in there, and I knew it wasn't an animal. The coroner was called to the home and confirmed that the bag contained the remains of a deceased infant, leading to the involvement of the state police. A subsequent search of the home initially resulted in 2 more dead babies being found in the attic. The Pennsylvania State Police on Thursday confirmed the discovery of a 4th baby's body in the home. In an interview with police, Malthy says she gave birth to all the children in her bathroom, with the first one being born about 6 years ago. The Tribune, citing to the criminal complaint, Malthy claimed that after giving birth to the first victim, she passed out on top of the child, and when she woke up, it was dead. She reportedly claimed that the second child was stillborn and never made a sound. She allegedly admitted to intentionally killing the 3rd child about a year ago and giving birth on the toilet. The child remained in the toilet for several minutes. During this time, she could hear the child making noises. Malthy removed the child from the toilet, wrapped a towel around the infant's entire body, where it remained until it stopped making noises. The 4th deceased child was not mentioned in the complaint. Authorities said Malthy, who has 2 adult children, never attempted to get any of the babies' medical attention, and following their deaths, did not make any effort to contact law enforcement. Police said the Indiana County Coroner's Office was performing autopsies on all 4 of the bodies recovered from the home. Malthy is currently being held in the Armstrong County Jail without bond. She is scheduled to appear in court for a preliminary hearing on September 30th. What an evil woman to take 4 infants' lives. She deserves the death penalty, but more than likely, she'll just spend life in prison.
And we peeled the towels back with a stick, and then we seen they were just rotting, decomposing something in there, and I knew that it wasn't an animal. After her dad passed, the money stopped coming in. I don't know that she's ever physically paid me the rent. She would coax churches into paying the rent. 3 or 4 different garbage bags tied tight. That's why she's where she's at.
Joining us now to talk more about this is prosecutor and former Deputy Attorney General of Ohio, Mark Weaver. Thank you as always for being with us on Law and Crime. There's really just no words for the information that keeps coming out on this story. What do you make of these new charges? And we're still waiting for autopsy results, but what do you take away from what Jessica Malthy is now charged with?
Prosecutors in Pennsylvania, we call them district attorneys. Prosecutors want to charge whatever they can early on to hold the defendant as the investigation continues. So they've charged her with a series of charges, not all of which are first-degree felonies. They could be, depending on what the medical examiner in nearby Indiana County tells us, based on were these children born alive? Could they have lived if they were born alive? And if the answer is yes on all 4 of these children, you might see these charges upgraded to 4 first-degree felonies, which in Pennsylvania are punishable by up to 10 to 20 years in prison each.
When you look at what she reportedly told investigators, and it's incredibly graphic, frankly, to talk about, but she said she was on the toilet and she gave birth to a child. That child was making noises. She took the child, wrapped the child in a towel or some sort of plastic, and the child stopped making noises. At that point, and she is charged with criminal homicide, what do you make? I mean, even if the other, the 3 other children, gosh, but even with that alone, I mean, is that something that could put her in prison for the rest of her life?
Yeah, depending on the judge and depending what else we find out. My sense is, having done a lot of cases over the years, is that she is under confessing. She's admitting just the basic facts of a couple of these things in hopes that investigators won't be able to learn more. If you and I are talking about this case weeks or months from now, I would imagine we're going to have more information, either from her, if she continues to cooperate and talk, or from information found from these autopsies. But rarely will a defendant acknowledge all of their culpability at the outset. Normally they will minimize their culpability.
And sadly, this story, and there's one that comes to mind, a separate case that we've been talking about recently, very different in a lot of ways, is Lake and Snelling out of Kentucky. And the question about whether her child was stillbirth, was it a stillbirth, or was this something where that child had a breath outside the womb? For people just kind of understanding what investigators are looking for at this point, how would, if they can determine if these 3 other children had a breath when they were born, how that could impact the case?
Yeah, obviously a child who's born dead, a stillborn child, you can't commit murder on that child. The charge you might be able to be brought against is abuse of a corpse. In some states, there's a charge of not notifying the authorities of a stillborn baby. But what investigators want to know is, number 1, were the children born alive? Did they take a breath? Number 2, could they have lived? Had they received any medical care, maternal care, anything at all? We all know how vulnerable infants are in that first few hours of life. And normally just being warmed up and clearing their mouth out of whatever's in their mouth is enough to get them into a healthy state. Now, the decomposition of these poor infants' bodies might be an impediment to the medical examiner being able to tell us all of that. But given how much time she could face, potentially on 4 charges, this might very well resolve at a plea agreement where she agrees to, say, 20 or 25 years.
For it seems in terms, too, of the under-admitting about what happened, because initially law enforcement had said that they had found 3 bodies, and she had reportedly admitted to law enforcement that she gave birth to those 3 children in the home, and now there's a 4th. What does that tell you about this investigation, what she's telling law enforcement? I'm just like, this story, and there's few that have me at a loss for words, but it's so horrific.
I've talked to a lot of juries after cases I've prosecuted, and what I've found is that people are willing to forgive a mistake. Jurors are just like the rest of us. They're just citizens who are called for jury duty. And so if this were a 1-infant situation, you could see some jurors feeling sorry for this mother. She was in a tough situation. 2, 3, 4 dead babies is a horrible pattern. It shows extremely deviant, or if you will, disregard for human life. And it's hard to imagine any juror, male, female, young, old, having sympathy for this woman who, after the first one, perhaps should have learned her lesson, and now we have 4 dead infants.
Part for me, too, that I keep trying to do in my mind is they were full-term pregnancies, you're thinking 9 months, and she wasn't in the home, I think, for more than a year. Like, how was this? I guess if you're an investigator, how do you go through, like, in determining the timeline of how it took place? Because it seems like this could have taken, and I don't know, and there's a lot that we don't know in terms of how old these children were, how when she gave birth, but it just seems like this could be something that went on longer than just the period of time she was in this home.
Yeah, we all know the math about how long it takes to make a baby, and we're going to find out how long she had access to this apartment. I've not read anything in the documents I've reviewed about twins or triplets. That could be explanatory. That's something that investigators will certainly be able to find out by examining DNA. Even a decomposed body will produce DNA that will tell you whether two different infants were twins or three of them were triplets. She also could have had access to this property even when not living there. We just don't know enough about those facts. I also will predict that her public defender will probably advance some sort of lack of capacity defense. Given these facts and given what she's already told investigators, I've never practiced criminal defense law. I've always been on the prosecution side of things, but I imagine defense lawyers would have very few avenues other than either diminished capacity or seeking a plea agreement where she might be able to get out of prison in her 50s or 60s.
From a prosecutorial standpoint, because you have her admitting at this point to it seems, if everything's true that's been reported, this criminal homicide charge, would you want to make a plea deal? If you could, if you seem to have a lot of evidence at this point that would be able to put her in jail and put her in front of a jury and get a long sentence.
This is a rural part of Pennsylvania. I'm a native Pennsylvanian. I know the Commonwealth pretty well. This is conservative country. This is the district attorneys tend to be more conservative. The juries tend to be more conservative. I could see a district attorney wanting to advance this case without much of a plea bargain unless he could get a significant prison sentence. It's received national attention. We're talking about it here on Law and Crime. So I'd be surprised if there were a small plea bargain. It would either be a serious plea bargain for decades in prison or this DA will take this woman to trial.
You might have already talked about this at the top, but I see that there's a criminal homicide count that she's facing and also involuntary manslaughter. Just as we're waiting for more information about all four children and how they died, what do you make of that involuntary manslaughter count and what that could be related to? One
of the accounts she gave with one of the infants was that she gave birth, she heard a noise, and then she passed out. And so perhaps the prosecutors imagining that this diminishes her mens rea, which state of mind, about whether or not she allowed this child to die. Many of these early charges are placeholder charges. They're the minimum charges that can be brought. You also want to hold the defendant in custody if possible, and they can be upgraded when we get more medical information from the medical examiner, in this case from Indiana County, a nearby county. It's a rural county. I've looked at it on a map, just where this house was. So it's not, you're outside Pittsburgh, but to your point, it's a very rural county. And I think a big question that may not be able to be answered now is just, how could this happen? Like, how does someone slip through the cracks, it seems, where no one could have known that this happened not one time, but allegedly 4 times? We've all heard stories about women who have concealed their pregnancies from their friends, even some of their family members. Perhaps they already weighed a lot and you couldn't tell they were pregnant. But having it happen 4 times strikes me as really hard to believe. I don't see a legal obligation on friends or family members to take some sort of action. That would be unusual. Certainly there's a moral obligation for someone to speak into this life of this woman if they know what's happening. Either way, we have 4 dead infants. We're not sure whether they were born alive. At least 1 or 2 of them was, according to her own admission. So this is the kind of case that's only probably going to get worse as we get more information from the medical examiner. I don't know if you've seen some of the images of inside the home that the landlord took. And I mean, it's in complete disarray. She gets evicted from the house. I mean, there's like a mattress in the middle of, and it's just, how does it, a lot of us could look at that and say, how does it get to that point? But when you look at that, and I think about cases of neglect, and she had 2 children there, I guess what is your reaction when you see something like that? Because there's also this 6-year-old and this 8-year-old that she did have, and people knew that she had,
And what's the line typically when it comes to law enforcement looking and saying that this is a case of neglect?
Most cases of neglect are handled by the local county children's service department, which has the ability to remove the child and place the child in a safe environment. Occasionally it results in criminal charges in the most serious cases. But more typically, and just for viewers, if you know of somebody who's raising children in an absolute dump of a house where it's not clean and perhaps animal feces are scattered around, or food scraps, or infestation by rats or insects, that's something you call children's services about. Children should not be raised in that environment. And I suppose, I mean, you could add other charges if these babies were alive for any period of time. Having a baby in a very unsanitary environment and not taking it to a safer place itself could bring about a charge of child endangering. But the child endangering charges are the least of this defendant's worries right now.
And talking about her husband, because his court records that we found, the offense happened on June 6th, 2023. I'll just run through them real quick. It was a DUI. DUI, that was his first offense for that. Endangering the welfare of children, some sort of property damage car charge, and then driving with a suspended license. It was his second violation. Records show he went to prison. He was sentenced in September, and then the record shows that he was in the state prison in Western PA starting in March. What do you make of those charges? Because that seems to be a major point in this, is that once he was out of the picture, she becomes a single parent. Not excusing any of this, but that had a major impact on her life and her ability to care for children.
Yeah, it sounds like there's something more to those charges. Rarely do you see first or second time DUI defendants go to state prison. So there's probably something else, previous record. If her defense counsel went to trial and tried to suggest that she had a greater burden because she was a single mother and therefore maybe killing these infants was the only logical thing to do, I doubt it works. It probably backfires and it offends single mothers in the jury who are making do just fine, thank you very much, without a man in the house. And so defense lawyers are frustrated because they often only have whatever facts their clients give them. And so either they're going to be in a hurry to get a plea deal, or they're going to be trying some pretty flimsy defenses, and that could be one of them.
And I think a big part of this story too in this investigation will be like, who's the parent, who's the father of these 4 children? Because if the dad has been out of the home in a year, and since September of last year when he was sentenced, or at least since March, how do you go about figuring out who the fathers are? Or maybe it's Jacob Mothy who's in prison, maybe it's someone else. I mean, how important is it if you're a prosecutor charging Jessica Mothy that you figure out if there was anybody else involved in this?
We try to answer the questions that jurors might have when they go back to deliberate, and certainly jurors might want to know who the fathers were. They are not a part of the essential elements of proving the case. If we have the DNA of the father, that could be matched against the DNA found in these dead infant bodies. Pretty quickly we'll know whether this father was the father of these 3 or 4 babies. But that is not one of the things the prosecutor has to prove. The prosecutor has to prove that the child was alive, that this woman knew the child was alive, and that she either caused their death or allowed the child to die without medical care.
And then just lastly, Mark, I think about Armstrong County, Pennsylvania. It's a rural county. Typically, you don't have national news stories there. I mean, you as a prosecutor, what is it like for those prosecutors in a rural county where you're probably not dealing with regularly these high-profile cases like this, and then suddenly a story that not just has the attention of Western PA, but of the nation, and they're looking to you to get a conviction?
Yeah, in most rural courthouses across the country, and I prosecuted cases in 12 different counties across Ohio, many of them rural, the trials are held with very few people in attendance, a few family members, maybe some courthouse observers, very, very little, if any, media. But then when a big case like this hits, it changes, and you have TV trucks outside and reporters. I prosecuted, along with a couple other prosecutors, a serial killer in Ashland County, Ohio. It was a death penalty case, and it was covered live here on Law and Crime. And that's the first time in many, many years that small rural county had seen that much media. But it was a multiple murder serial death penalty case, and so the media came because people wanted to know what's going on. That could happen if this trial goes forward.